Throughout the current chapter, I've been using this calculation worksheet file to create and test various calculation expressions. That's really just for convenience because it allows me to show you the calculation expression and the result it produces side by side in the same window, and also it's allowed me to accumulate records containing each of the calculations I've entered, which you can download in the work files for this chapter. But in fact, when you're creating calculations yourself, you'll almost always be doing it in FileMaker's Specify Calculation dialog, which appears whenever and wherever there is an opportunity to supply a value or a result programmatically. For example, in layout mode, if I choose the button tool and add a button in the header area of the current layout, if I scroll to the bottom of the available script commands and choose Show Custom Dialog, a Specify button appears at the lower right of the Options panel in the Button Setup dialog. When I click on the Specify button, an Options dialog appears allowing me to specify what should appear in a dialog when the button I'm configuring is pressed. Inside the Options dialog, there are two more Specify buttons, and if I don't want to directly type in the text for the title and message for a dialog, I can instead have a calculation produce the text that will appear in the dialog. For example, if I click on the Specify button next to the Message panel, the Specify Calculation dialog appears here, allowing me to enter a calculation expression that will produce the message text for the dialog. In this case, I'm going to enter "today is" as a text literal, then enter the day name function and the getCurrentDate function. Then I'll add another text literal to put a period at the end of the sentence. When this particular calculation is evaluated, it's going to append together the text literal "today is" with the name of the current day according to the computer system clock, and then it's going to add on the end of that string a full stop or period. Let's test that out. I'll put a label on the button, return to browse mode and click the button. Today is Thursday. So using a calculation, I've just dynamically produced the text for the dialog. Of course, I can enter any of the vast range of calculation expressions that are possible in FileMaker, and each of them will work just as well here as they will anywhere else in the application. So let's look at the Specify Calculation dialog, because you're going to see it quite frequently. The dialog has at the top left access to all of the table occurrences, and from the bottom of the menu you can bring up the Manage Database dialog to make changes or to refresh your memory about the structure of the file. Once you've chosen an appropriate table occurrence, you can then choose from the fields in the table. However, you don't have to use the list. If you know the name of the table occurrence and the field, you can simply type them directly into the calculation expression area of the dialog. In the top center, under the heading Operators, as you can see, there are a number of buttons which allow you to insert symbols that have a particular meaning within calculations. The block of buttons provide you with the division, multiplication, subtraction, and addition operators. At the left are four other very useful operators: the append operator, which allows you to concatenate or join together two alphanumeric strings; the literal text operator, which inserts a pair of double quotes with the insertion point in between them, waiting for you to enter some literal text. Then there's a button which allows you to enter a pilcrow. You'll remember that I mentioned you can type a pilcrow with Option 7 on Macintosh or Alt 0182 on Windows. But here in the Specify Calculation dialog, you have a button which you can click on to insert a pilcrow without having to remember the keyboard command. And at the lower left of the operators block is a button that will insert parentheses, again with the insertion point flashing in between the two parentheses so that you can control the order of operations, requiring part of your expression to be evaluated in full before other adjoining elements of the expression are evaluated. At the right of the operators section, operators for comparing values and for controlling comparisons are available, and at the bottom of the list is the NOT operator, which reverses the result of a test, making a yes into a no and vice versa, and at the bottom of the list the exponent symbol to raise a value to a given power. Then at the top right is a panel that gives you access to lists of the available functions. By default, all functions are listed. However, particular kinds of functions, such as the get function, are only shown once in the list. The get function has many different flags which can be inserted to control its behavior, and if you want to look at a list of all of the available flags, you need to choose get functions from the list of function types. Then all of the various get function flags are separately listed. So these areas at the top of the dialog provide important resources or reminders of what's available. But in fact, if you already know the functions and the syntax that you want to use for a calculation, you can simply type it directly into the calculation expression panel, and the effect will be much the same as when I typed calculation expressions into a field in the calculation worksheet. So for example, I can enter an expression such as if worksheet serial number is less than 10, 0, and worksheet serial number. If I've made a mistake in entering the expression, for example, if I'd included a space where no space is required in the name of the serial number field, when I click the OK button to exit the dialog, FileMaker scans what's been entered and attempts to make sense of it. When it finds something that doesn't make sense as part of a calculation expression, it posts an error, in this case that the specified field cannot be found. When FileMaker scans what you've entered, it identifies each element as a function name, a field name, a text literal, a numeric value, an operator, and so on. The position of various elements, such as the opening bracket for the function parameters, are treated as the dividing line between the function name and what follows, for example, the table occurrence name and field name. In between other elements, such as between the field name and the operator, it's customary to put a space. But in fact, you can put multiple spaces and FileMaker will ignore them. You can also include line breaks, and they'll be treated just the same as redundant spaces. So with a complex calculation expression, it may make sense to break it up and put the elements of the calculation onto different lines. For example, I could put the if function name on the first line, the test on the next line, the result on the next line, and the trailing appended field value on the fourth line. Now each line contains only one component of the calculation, possibly making it easier to see what's what. Another useful feature of calculations is that you can add comments, so you can include labels and explanations and reminders of what it is that you are doing with a particular calculation. The most common way to add comments is to use the convention of 2 forward slashes preceding the comment. Everything after 2 forward slashes until the end of the line, that is, to the next carriage return, is ignored. So for example, if I put in a couple of spaces, then a couple of slashes, and then this is the serial number of the current record, FileMaker will ignore everything after the 2 slashes. If I need to put in a comment that's going to run for several lines, I can start it with a single slash and an asterisk. Then I can enter whatever I like, including text that runs for multiple lines. And when I close the comment with an asterisk and a forward slash, everything that then follows is again treated as part of the calculation expression. So you can add extra carriage returns, extra spaces, and comments to your calculations as pointers, reminders, and signposts of the purpose of each element. Wherever the calculation dialog appears, you'll see the same central group of panels and buttons, the same tools and lists are present, and everything works in the same way. So it pays to be familiar with the principles I've outlined here.